Part 51. A Middle School Cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 503. Oh, 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 the troublemaker is already here. Looking at the crowd of editors gathered by Yoshida outside the conference room, Makoto Takahashi glanced at the crowd of cartoonists, and finally stopped at the good friend of Yachen Mumenjai. On the body, so you guys, have you completely remembered what I just said? Especially the good friends of Aiken Mumenjai. Yes, compared with the energetic cartoonists around him, Aju Mumenha looked like he was burning out. He was completely out of place. By the way, the real trump card is to deal with the new commander. Makoto Takahashi walked to the door of the conference room, took a deep breath, and did the final battle without looking back. Former mobilization. So Yachen Mumenjai, leave the trash fish to us. You who are stepping on our corpses must win the final victory. It's just a matter of discussing the serialization of the new comic with the weekly editorial department. Is it necessary to make the atmosphere as tragic as preparing for a fight to the death? Although Aju Mumenha really wanted to complain like this, but after seeing everyone on the side of the cartoonists and cartoonists around them entered a state of high spirits, the pair of good friends looked at each other helplessly and lowered their heads in resignation. This is the atmosphere, this is the feeling. Looking at the high-spirited looks of his colleagues on the cartoonist side, Makoto Takahashi nodded with satisfaction, completely ignoring the black lines on his face outside the conference room, and even the weekly editor who was about to knock on the door. Sighed. Everyone is ready. The assault operation begins. So a certain middle school cartoonist opened the door of the conference room and let the long-awaited weekly editor in sideways, and then the battle between the editorial side of the Weekly Shounen Jump and the Fukudagumi, the cartoonist side, has officially begun. Little Sea Otter, I will leave my familiar cat to you this time. Makoto Takahashi looked at Yoshida who was walking towards him, and immediately directed the Little Sea Otter to fight in the front line. Watching the Little Sea Otter tremble a little because of fear body, Takahashi Makoto shook his head helplessly, and used the skill commonly used method to motivate Little Sea Otters. Hey, Little Sea Otter, according to the information I have collected before, my companion cat has been your assistant who has repeatedly encouraged you to pursue Miss Kangshuhong. Nani? Mr. Yoshida, Mr. Yoshida. The Little Sea Otter's body stopped trembling and looked at Yoshida in disbelief. This, that. Once upon a time, Yoshida did this in order to force the Little Sea Otter to complete the manga manuscript seriously, so now when facing the Little Sea Otter, Yoshida turned his head away unnaturally. However, at that time, the relationship between the Little Sea Otter and Miss Kangshuhong had not even been confirmed. Yoshida used this method to dominate and stimulate the Little Sea Otter, which was very consistent with the scheming attribute of a certain editor. Of course, the most important thing is, the person who originally suggested doing this was a certain middle-class cartoonist who was present now. As a man, as the husband of Miss Kangshuhong, can you tolerate this kind of thing? Seeing Yoshida's tangled expression and his wandering eyes, Takahashi Makoto instantly understood Yoshida's intention to draw the flames of war onto himself. So he spoke decisively and continued to bewitch the Little Sea Otter. S.A. Little Sea Otter, here and now, under the witness of our cartoonists and editors, fight like a man. What on earth, what is going on, Mr. Yoshida? From the time when he saw Yoshida, he would take the initiative to retreat, but now he stands in front of Yoshida with a fierce fighting spirit, under the heart-rending mouth of a certain second-year manga artist. With the support of the cannon, the Little Sea Otter took the initiative to block Yoshida's way as planned before. Should I say that the magic of love is irresistible? Or should we say, that a certain middle-class cartoonist's ability to confuse is truly cruel and insane? So Yoshida, the temporary leader of the editorial side of the weekly, was stopped by his Little Sea Otter. After Yujiro learned that Eiji Nyaizuma had completed the new manga draft, out of his sense of responsibility as an editor, he naturally wanted to observe the new manga draft as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the way forward was blocked by the silver-haired brother Fukuda. "Hey, Yujiro-san, this is my revised manga draft." The silver-haired guy stopped his editor Yujiro as he had arranged before, with a ferocious smile on his face. "This is already my fifth. This is the revised manga manuscript. Yujiro-san, you must read it carefully." Hearing Fukuda's words that he spoke in a louder voice, and looking at the dangerous smile on the other person's face, Yujiro swallowed with some fear, and stammered in a low voice, "Fukuda-jun, your comic manuscript, I have read it before, I have read it before." "Huh? This is the manga manuscript that I have revised from the beginning." Although the silver-haired brother Fukuda still maintained a smile on his face, his tone of voice was full of dissatisfaction. "Yujiro-san, haven't you been with me many times before? Did I say that you must show me the comic manuscript after it is revised? Now I have revised it seriously according to your request." I know. I will definitely read your manga manuscript carefully." Although I really want to complain about Fukuda, I don't think the cartoonist is more like a delinquent at this moment, but considering the cruelty of his cartoonists, Yujiro still chose to give in. As arranged by Makoto Takahashi before, the silver-haired brother Fukuda is here to contain the editor-in-chief Yujiro and maintain the combat effectiveness of his ally Nyaizuma Eiji. Editor Hattori looked at Yoshida and Yujiro with some sympathy, and then went straight to the cartoonist Ajumu under his command. Unlike his two colleagues, among the cartoonists under editor Hattori, the only ones present now are the gay pair Ajumu. Editor Hattori knows some news about the newly completed manga Gokuso by Kamiya Aho. For example, the theme of the comic came from a certain yellow-haired glasses man who saw his neighbor's children learning Go. Another example is the character design of the comic. A certain Landé classmate revealed that a certain soy sauce uncle who appeared at the beginning was inspired by a certain middle-level cartoonist duo. This time he talks about his expectations for his son's future. Another example is that the source of inspiration for the comic is actually when a certain yellow-haired glasses guy was stuck in the plot one day, and complained to his good friend a certain blue boy, hoping that there would be existences like ghosts to help and guide myself to complete the comic draft. Although when editor Hattori heard these things, he just listened to them as anecdotes and didn't take them to heart, but now he learned that Ajumu, a pair of good friends, actually created works based on those interesting things before. Published a new comic, and also completed the manga manuscript. As editor Hattori, who has witnessed Ajumu rise from obscurity to now becoming a popular cartoonist, whether it is to satisfy his own curiosity, or out of love for gays with the support of the friend group, they all want to see this comic called The Soul of Chess as soon as possible. However, well, editor Hattori, can you please take a look at my new manga? Holding his manga manuscript with both hands, Shizuka blocked the way of the editor in charge of Hattori. "I remember you are, Mr. Shizuka, who serialized the manga Zan in the monthly magazine, right? Haha." After letting out his habitual laughter, editor Hattori did not take over Shizuka's manga manuscript, but curiously asked, "Why does teacher Jinghe want me to read your manga manuscript?" "Because master once said that compared to Mr. Yoshida and Mr. Yujiro, Mr. Hattori is the editor with the best compatibility with me." Shizuka ignored Makoto Takahashi, who was standing aside, and continued to explain to editor Hattori, "Furthermore, master also said that among all the editors, Mr. Hattori is the only one who knows the most about non-kingdom comics, and your comments and opinions are the most valuable. Teacher Phoenix Academy is a bit exaggerated, haha, people always feel better when they hear praise, and Hattori editor is no exception." Of course, unlike some people who showed modesty, editor Hattori was not complacent because of Shizuka's boast. Instead, he took the manga manuscript from Shizuka's hand and asked curiously, "I heard you write just now. Shizuka-sensei, the style of your new work seems to be the same as the previous comics of Ajumu and others, and it belongs to the non-royal type. Based on the comic manuscripts I have completed so far, master has judged this." "That's it, haha, Editor Hattori scratched his head, looked at the nervous Shizukawa, let out a habitual laugh, and said, "Then let me read your new work, Mr. Shizuka." "Thank you very much." "You're welcome." "Mr. Shizukawa, you previously serialized Jean in the monthly magazine, but it is a manga that I like very much and am very fond of, haha." I had to convince the editor that the affinity was higher than that of my colleagues Yojiro and Yoshida, at least before observing the manga. Hattori didn't forget to ease Shizuka's tension. "Teacher Jing-hee, don't be too nervous. Since your new comic has been approved by the Phoenix Academy teacher, I think it should be a very interesting comic, haha." Seeing that editor Hattori had begun to look through his own assassination, Shizukawa, who originally wanted to say something, immediately closed his mouth, sat down opposite editor Hattori, and waited patiently. According to Makoto Takahashi's plan, editor Hattori was intercepted by Shizukawa. On the one hand, it is to allow Ajumumenha to accumulate strength and deal with the bottle editor later. On the other hand, Makoto Takahashi naturally hopes that editor Hattori will give Shizukawa some guidance as the editor-in-chief. Of course, if he can become Shizukawa's editor, that couldn't be better. Everything is just as I expected. Looking at the companions who stopped the editor side of the weekly magazine in one-on-one, Takahashi Makoto smiled at the remaining new wife AG and good gay friends on the cartoonist side. In the remaining time, let us recharge our batteries, and when the new commander arrives, let's just start a big instant kill. Oh, the only person who responded vigorously to Takahashi Makoto was his ally, Eiji Shinzuma. Haha, Yachin Mumanjai didn't know what to say at this time. Maybe smiling is a good choice. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 504. Hey, Yujiro, are you sure you really read my revised manga manuscript carefully? Looking at his editor-in-chief, Yujiro, flipping through the manga manuscript in his hand at an extremely fast speed, the silver-haired brother Fukuda's face turned pale. A little gloomy, with a strong attitude of prepare your last words before you explain them clearly. Fukuda-kun, don't underestimate me as the editor-in-charge, although Yuichiro has always shown a weak look when getting along with his cartoonists, but, I should say, does every weak feeling have a strong moment? Yujiro held the manga manuscript in his hand and stared at his cartoonist Fukuda with a serious expression. Although I think some details can be revised, but compared with Fukuda-kun's previous manga manuscripts, this JoJo it's very rare to draw such a serious cartoon manuscript. Hey. It sounds like I haven't taken it seriously before. The silver-haired boy Fukuda complained a little unhappily, and then grabbed the manga manuscript from Yujiro's hand. Then what needs to be modified is, in order to show the battle scenes in this manga, there is nothing wrong with choosing this style of painting, but some details still need to be paid attention to. I didn't care about the tone of Fukuda's words, because Yujiro had completely entered observation author-editor. Is it the reason in the model? For example, the fighting scenes here look relatively random and do not give people who read the comics a sense of reality. Another example is here. Yujiro actually suppressed the silver-haired brother Fukuda. Is this a weak counterattack? Hiramaru-kun, now I always know why Cheng did that in the first place. Yoshida put down the manga manuscript and stared at the little sea otter with a gloomy face. The plot of the manga manuscript got stuck when I saw the exciting part. Forget it, but when I think about how you always find excuses to be lazy and don't want to finish the comic manuscript when you haven't finished it, and you even hide around, the more I think about it, the more angry I get. Mr. Yoshida, weren't we just discussing your previous instigation? Now we are discussing comics. If Hiramaru-kun, you want to talk about something that has nothing to do with comics, then I will take up the sweet time between you and Miss Soja Kurane later and have a good chat with you. The little sea otter, who has a huge advantage, has been seized by Yoshida at this moment. Sure enough, even if a certain middle-level cartoonist specially provides a battle environment, a mere little sea otter is still not Yoshida's opponent after all. Regardless of the plot and style of this comic, compared to your previous works, this comic can be regarded as the most outstanding one. But when I think about how you usually use various excuses to avoid completing the comic manuscript, I feel quite angry. I just want to rest for a while. The little sea otter seemed to feel the murderous intention of his editor-in-charge, and wisely stopped what he had not finished. Rest? Huh. Don't even think about it. Yoshida slapped the comic manuscript. After this comic enters the weekly serialization, I will watch you finish the comic manuscript every day. The standard of this comic is very high, but because of this, I will never allow you, Hiromaro-kun, to behave like you did in the past when serializing this manga. Hey, Hiromaro-kun, I am doing this for your own good after all. You who publish such high-level comics can't have your comics cut in half because of your own willfulness, right? But if you don't rest. The little sea otter tried to make the final resistance. Hiromaro-kun, you are my favorite cartoonist, and you are also the most talented cartoonist besides Chen, so I don't want to see you ruin your talent because you are too lazy. You understand how I feel. Yoshida patted the little sea otter on the shoulder and said in a serious tone, I know you really want to rest and live a sweet, loving, and happy life with Miss Kang Shuhong. Yoshida, the little sea otter grabbed Yoshida's hands excitedly, you actually know what kind of lifestyle I have always longed for. I misunderstood you. That's right, Hiromaro-kun. I've always known what you want. The little sea otter, who was being moved, didn't seem to notice the devilish smile on Yoshida's face, but Hiromaro-kun, I have never considered that. You who have talent but are unwilling to work hard will be the one who will be abandoned in the future when you get along with Miss Kang Shuhong, who has no obvious talent but works very hard. But you. Impossible. Yuri-chan will never abandon me. The little sea otter was frightened by Yoshida's curse and turned pale. There is nothing impossible in this world, Hiromaro-kun. There have been countless geniuses in the history of human development. However, many of them have wasted their talents because human beings do not know how to cherish what they have. The bad nature of things. Looking at the little sea otter that was completely dominated by him, Yoshida finally showed a satisfied smile. Hiromaro-kun, you are lazy and don't want to finish the manga because you have a talent that other cartoonists don't have. Manuscript, speaking of the bad nature of human beings, will Miss Sojuhong have other thoughts, leading to the ending of leaving sadly? And at that time, was Hiromaro-kun considered the abandoned party? Or is it counted as the abandoned party? I know. As expected, the best way to tame the little otter is to simulate the thinking mode of a certain middle school cartoonist, and make reasonable use of the mouth cannon bombardment and various alarmist remarks to deter. In order to protect Yuri-chan, and to keep Yuri-chan by my side, I will definitely complete the comic manuscript seriously in the next period of time. Yes, that's it. It's really good to have such awareness. Yoshida looked down at the little otter, with a dark smile on his face. Man, Hiromaro-kun. In the next period of time, I will definitely strictly urge you to complete the comic manuscript, because I am your editor-in-charge. Sure enough, since Makoto Takahashi taught Yoshida how to find pleasure, the little otter's life has become more and more miserable. Compared with the two groups of the little otter and Yoshida and Yujiro and the silver-haired brother Fukuda, the communication between Shizukawa and the editor Hattori is quite smooth. It's really an interesting comic, Mr. Jing-hee. Hee. Editor Hattori put down the comic manuscript in his hand and looked at Jing-hee River, who looked a little nervous. He didn't wring people's appetite like a certain black-bellied editor, nor did he suppress and praise like a certain weak editor. Instead, he generously gave his first impression after observing the comic manuscript. Then, are there any shortcomings in the comic itself and the comic manuscript? Jing-hee River did not become complacent because of being praised. Instead, he stared at editor Hattori seriously and asked with some expectation. Of course, Jing-hee River asked this not to test the editor-in-charge Hattori. Since Makoto Takahashi gave editor Hattori a very high evaluation, Jinghe River, who admired and worshipped a certain middle school cartoonist, naturally believed in the judgment of his master. The reason why he asked editor Hattori this question was just to make the comic manuscript he completed more outstanding and the comic he created more interesting, that's all. If you want to grow or want to succeed, you must have a humble heart and know how to ask questions. This is quite necessary. Well, regarding the plot of the comics, I will reserve my opinion because I haven't discussed it in detail with you, Mr. Jinghe. Among the editors in charge of the weekly magazine, editor Hattori is definitely a three-have editor who has a conscience, integrity, and sense of responsibility. But regarding the comic manuscript, how about we analyze it slowly from the first page? Although editor Hattori's attitude of talking freely at this moment seems to be familiar with it, Jinghe River can feel that the other party is not perfunctory, but really wants to communicate with himself as a cartoonist, as a responsible editor. Please, Jinghe River felt the sincerity of editor Hattori and immediately stood up and bowed to a certain sea urchin-headed editor to express his gratitude. I've already said that there's no need to do this, haha. Hattori editor waved his hand indifferently, gave a habitual silly smile, and turned over the previously sorted assassination comic manuscript, pointed to the first page of the comic manuscript and began to give his own opinions. Here on the first page, first of all, we need to modify the style of this page. Do you want to explain the comic manuscript page by page in detail like this? After listening to Hattori editor's words, Shizuka River asked Hattori editor with some surprise. Of course. Hattori editor replied calmly with a matter-of-fact tone, but seeing Shizuka River's somewhat surprised expression, Hattori editor immediately reacted, scratching his head and apologetically saying, sorry, I and Yashiro Mumanjai are used to communicating like this, haha. If Shizuka teacher, you don't want to use this communication mode, then we. The same treatment as Yashiro Mumanjai? Shizuka River is not very clear about how much difference Yashiro Mumanjai has made since his debut, but when he was Takahashi Makoto's assistant, Shizuka River really witnessed the speed of progress of Yashiro Mumanjai and his good friends. So. No. Please keep doing this. If Yashiro Mumanjai can improve, so can I. The four cartoonists who were in charge mode watched the exchange between Shizukawa and Hattori editor. Hey, good friends, do you feel strangely familiar with what happened to Ryoko just now? Takahashi Makoto showed a smile that deserved a slap, and turned to Yashiro Mumanjai and asked, compared to my servant cat and the servant of the Black Flame King, the sea urchin editor is the most suitable editor in charge for Ryoko. With the assistance of the sea urchin editor, Ryoko will become the opponent we are looking forward to. That's right. Nyaizuma Ag focused his eyes on Shizukawa, with an expectant look on his face. After Fengguangai Yuan teacher and Yashiro Mumanjai teacher, there is another worthy one. A rival to look forward to. It turns out that drawing comics is a very interesting thing. Whether it is Nazuma-kun or Aiken, they were already difficult to catch up with. Now there is Jinghe-kun. The yellow-haired man with glasses smiled helplessly and whispered to his good friend, "Why do I feel unprecedented pressure? Maybe it's because we don't want to lose, right?" Compared to his good friend's helpless look, Landai classmate is full of fighting spirit. No matter who the opponent is, we just have to believe in the comics we have completed with all our strength, and that's enough. There is a goal ahead, which provides the motivation to move forward. There are pursuers behind, which provides endless pressure. Perhaps this is the best environment to force humans to progress and grow. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 505. While the editors on the editorial side of the weekly were communicating with the cartoonist side, the editor-in-chief of the bottle also ended the call with the editor-in-chief Sasaki. "What do you mean, Since you are now the editor-in-chief of the weekly magazine Shonen Jump, everything should be decided by you. The editor-in-chief put down the phone with a wry smile on his face, and turned aside the rows of neatly arranged weekly magazines on the bookshelf. In the sample issue, he sighed with some melancholy. When you encounter something that is difficult to decide or even impossible to solve, isn't it natural to ask your seniors for advice? Should I bet that they can regain their previous glory? Or should I bet that they cannot surpass that miracle? The editor-in-chief of Bottle got up and went to the bookshelf, pulled out a well-packaged sample magazine of the weekly, and after pondering for a moment, confusion appeared in his eyes. Gradually disappeared, replaced by a touch of determination. Since everything is left to me, then let me witness everything. The editor-in-chief of the Bottle, carrying a sample of a certain weekly magazine, attacks. Oh, has the last enemy finally appeared? Opening the lily curtains in the conference room, Takahashi Makoto saw the serious-looking editor-in-chief of Bottle slowly walking towards him, with a playful smile on his face, and turned towards the other three people who were idle next to the cartoonist said, "That's enough chatter. Gentlemen, prepare for a surprise attack as planned. The first attack, I leave it to you, the King of Black Flame." "Oh, has the target appeared?" Eiji, the new wife, walked to Takahashi Makoto's side, also showed an expectant smile, saluted a military salute, patted his chest and assured, "Man, there is only one person on the other side, so don't worry, leave it to me, Your Excellency." After hearing Shinzuma Eiji's words, Takahashi Makoto suddenly fell into silence. He raised his hand and patted Shinzuma Eiji on the shoulder. He walked to Ajumenha's good friend and sighed in an extremely melancholy tone, "What a good team of friends, be prepared for rescue at any time. I think the King of Black Flame is about to kneel." Chang, why did you suddenly say that? First there is the flag of attack first, you will die, and then there is the classic flag of the opponent has only one person. Do you think there is still suspense in this battle? Makoto Takahashi is ready to spread the word to the group of good friends of Yachin Mumenjai. Common knowledge about death flag, the King of Black Flame is destined to die, that's for sure. You must know this and so. Lande, for a rare moment, interrupted the forced science popularization time that Makoto Takahashi was preparing to conduct. "It's just a discussion with the editor about the issue of the new comic series, nothing will happen at all. Death in battle, the result of death." Humph. That's because Landai, you don't realize the cruelty of this war. Makoto Takahashi waved his hand disdainfully, turned to Landai's good friend Huangmao Glasses and said, "Hey, Mr. Huangmao Glasses, I will leave all the negotiation issues to you later. Remember what I told you before, after all, your abilities are limited, so there is no need for you to do anything, and what is required of you. Extent, what you need to do, and the only thing you can do is clearly tell the editor our intentions, and at the same time show our will and awareness. Is there nothing wrong with this?" The corner of the yellow-haired glasses man's mouth twitched. Although he was quite reluctant to say it like this, under a certain middle-level cartoonist under the gaze of those ferocious eyes, good friend Yachin Mumenjai still compromised. "What, don't you remember it very clearly?" Makoto Takahashi nodded with satisfaction, his eyes drifted to the editor-in-chief of the Bottle who was communicating with his new wife Eiji, and said to Ajumenha without looking back, "Of course. Speaking of which, if the plans I prepared before go well, maybe you guys, good gay friends, don't need to go out in person to use the combo combat skills true gay friends unparalleled. That's the best." Regardless of the content of the words or the resentful tone when speaking, the yellow-haired glasses gentleman and Landai are exactly the same. It can be said that they have worked hard to practice philosophy and combat skills. Good gay friend? In the first round of negotiations between the remaining cartoonists and the editor-in-chief of Bottle, Eiji Nyaizuma was clearly defeated. He looked up at the cartoonists around him who were communicating with the editors in charge. The editor-in-chief of Bottle pushed up his glasses and looked at the remaining three, who definitely looked like they were in idle standby state, walked away. Although I really want to yell "this is my turn" like Ryuuki, and drive the Musa directly. Makoto Takahashi said with a smile, while coming to the front of the bottle editor, but considering the importance of the Commander-in-Chief, you don't seem to be able to do much harm, so let's start the conversation in another way. I have already listened to Eiji Shinzuma's proposal. Next is Makoto Takahashi, the editor-in-chief of the bottle looked up at Ajumumenha over there, and then at Makoto Takahashi in front of him, with some curiosity. He sighed with emotion. I thought the next person to convince me would be Akin Mumenjai and the others. Persuading, repeating the key words just spoken by the bottle editor in a low voice, Makoto Takahashi suppressed the smile on his face. It seems that you have made a decision, Commander, and it's very depressing. Yes, your decision seems to be completely contrary to our expectations. However, nothing in the world can be measured by the word absolute, isn't that what you think? Indeed. If we choose to give up before even trying, how can we break the barrier of this corrupt and fallen world? You have no intention of giving up. A smile appeared on the serious face of the editor-in-chief Pingze. He, then I will looking forward to how you can convince me to agree to the unprecedented decision of serializing 6 new comics at the serialization meeting. Just what I want. Ha 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 ha. Even though I heard the editor-in-chief Pingze take the initiative to say Takahashi Makoto's proposal, even though the editor-in-chief did not directly refuse, even though the cartoonists most worried a certain middle school cartoonist's coercion incident did not happen, however, just based on the extremely dangerous conversation between the two, both the cartoonist and the editor-in-chief could feel that the first round of verbal confrontation between Takahashi Makoto and the editor-in-chief Pingze ended in a tie for the time being. But looking at the two people talking happily, everyone present could clearly feel that the next second exchange might be the key to determining the outcome. A clash of wills. As the protagonist, I naturally possess a powerful aura that can exempt me from first to attack, must die, so this time, I will attack first. It is Takahashi Makoto's usual practice to talk about some irrelevant things before the opening. Of course, that weird remark was bewildering to everyone except the good friend duo of Yashiro and Mumenjai, who had just been forced to popularize science by a certain middle school cartoonist. First, let's talk about the new series of the cartoonists. Yoshida has already told me all this. Editor Pingze glanced at Yoshida, who was enjoying the pleasure of the little otter, and continued to talk with Makoto Takahashi. Reviewing comics is not my job alone, so the new series you are going to submit will all have to wait until the serialization meeting for everyone to discuss and decide. What's more, my likes and dislikes of the new comics are just my personal judgment, and at most they can only serve as a reference opinion at the serialization meeting, that's all. Editor Pingze's explanation sounds reasonable, but the cartoonists still feel depressed. Every comic that is ready to be submitted for the new series is the result of the hard work of the cartoonists, and now editor Pingze uses this excuse to not observe the new serialized comic manuscripts and directly ignores the efforts of the cartoonists. How can this not make the cartoonists depressed? However, the only thing that makes the cartoonists feel relieved is what editor Pingze just mentioned. The new serialized comics submitted by the cartoonists were not directly ignored because they met the serialization number as predicted by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist before. Editor Pingze personally promised this, which really relieved everyone on the cartoonist side. Are you so strong that you skip the step of observing the comics because you are worried that your will be shaken by interpreting the comic's plot? However, the Chuyuni cartoonist did not take the opportunity to give in. Instead, he looked at editor Pingze meaningfully. Then Commander, if the 6 new serials submitted this time are good enough, the editors who participated in the serialization meeting even think that they can be directly serialized, and even the unpleasant candidate modification will not appear. In this case, will you, or Weekly Shonen Jump agree? Absolutely not. I should have answered you like this, but I have already said it before. Editor Pingze restrained his smile and his expression became unusually serious. I look forward to what you have to say, Makoto Takahashi. In order to participate in the big brawl of this new serialization, someone on the cartoonist side forced himself to create and complete a part of the comics in a very short time. In order to participate in the big brawl of this new serialization, someone on the cartoonist side not only repeatedly revised the completed comics, but also repeatedly postponed the time of his serialization. In order to participate in the big brawl of this new serialization, someone on the cartoonist side, knowing that he was in a hurry, still intervened in the war with a smile on his face and high morale. Looking at the cartoonists present, Makoto Takahashi tried his best to explain this fact in a calm tone, but both the cartoonist side and the editor side could feel that a certain middle school cartoonist was brewing emotions for the future. I push myself almost masochistically because I want to be on the same starting line. I endure the loneliness of revising again and again because I want to have a fair fight. The reason why we choose to embark on this thorny road, even at the cost of raising the banner of rebellion, and spend time and effort to do this seemingly absurd thing. It's not because I think it's interesting or fun, nor is it because I'm eager to win and want to take the opportunity to determine who is better. I will go all out to participate in this big brawl, and I would rather face all kinds of hardships to have a fair fight. All of this is out of respect for those who recognize me, and the highest respect for those who are read as opponents and written as companions. Pa. Takahashi Makoto, what you just said is indeed a very good reason. Ping's editor clapped his hands, but if you want to convince me, this is not enough. It still doesn't work. Do you think I would say that? Humph, I see through everything and have already come up with a plan to deal with it. As expected, a certain middle school manga artist is only handsome for 5 seconds. Turning his head to look at the good friend group of Yachin Mumanai on the side, Takahashi Makoto showed a sinister smile on his face. Now it's time to use the trump card provided by a certain good friend group. If Takahashi Makoto fails to convince the editor-in-chief, the good friends will appear. This is what Ashiro Mumanjai and a certain Chuyuni cartoonist agreed to do before, and it's correct. But now, the trump card we provided. For the actions of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist that did not go according to plan, Ashiro Mumanjai's good friend was completely confused. Well, the weather is cold, and all readers should rest early. Well, keep warm, a certain cat seems to have caught a cold again. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 506. Hey, Commander, before revealing the final trump card, may I ask a question? This is just a polite and formal statement by a middle-class cartoonist. In fact, in the bottle before the editor-in-chief answered, Makoto Takahashi had already asked the question directly. To surpass the glory of the past and create new glory, what is the most necessary and indispensable thing, exactly? Originally, I was still thinking about what Chen wanted to express when he said those words before. Over there, the man with yellow-haired glasses who was listening carefully to the exchange between Takahashi Makoto and the editor-in-chief of Bottle, heard Takahashi Makoto's jump. After changing the topic, he stumbled unsteadily, smiled awkwardly at his good friend, and whispered, "Ahaha, but Aiken, the topic jumped, a bit too much." Idiot. After pondering for a long time, Landai finally came up with a qualifying word to describe his current opinion of a certain middle school cartoonist. For Yoshida, who has been your editor-in-charge, to be honest, I really feel a little sympathy for him at the moment. The editor-in-chief of the Bottle feels a little headache now. After glancing at Yoshida who was watching over there, the editor-in-chief of the Bottle was very surprised. He almost hid the sympathy in his eyes. Takahashi Makoto, let's stop chatting here. What do you really want to say? When faced with a situation that exceeds your expectations, do you just choose to go straight to the point? So until today, my cat is just an editor-in-charge. It is true that you need to have this kind of adaptability to be able to secure the position of the chief executive. After looking at the crowd of onlookers, Yoshida with the same sympathy as the Bottle, Takahashi Makoto stopped at the ridicule of a certain editor. After all, he always regards Yoshida as the object of being toyed with, and maybe he will become a person after a long time. A certain editor in charge totally screwed it up. However, Commander-in-Chief, you should slightly increase the salary and status of my familiar cat. Of course, it cannot be too exaggerated. After all, as a toy that gives me pleasure, my familiar cat is quite worthy of a reward. But if my companion cat gets rid of its status as the royal toy of His Majesty the Fierce Demon King of the Phoenix Academy due to the increase in status and salary, I will be very troubled. Chen, When he first heard that Makoto Takahashi hoped that the editor-in-chief would promote him and raise his salary, Yoshida was very moved, but after hearing what Makoto Takahashi said next, Yoshida felt bad. The thank you that was originally on the lips was swallowed back by a certain editor with strong will, mixed with endless resentment, and then turned into extremely heavy resentment, and roared into the current world again. You're so weak. Oh, my cat's fur is really blowing up. Looking at Yoshida's expression at this moment, Makoto Takahashi was extremely satisfied and gave a thumbs up to the editor-in-chief of the bottle. I didn't expect that the commander-in-chief would be the legendary one. Supporter Before leaving this morning, in order to ensure that the plan goes smoothly, I asked for a divination. According to the divination reminder, there will be a sudden supporter to help me achieve my expected career unimaginable. Great harvest. It seems that if I don't want to continue drawing comics at home, I might consider changing my job to a fortune teller under an overpass or in a dark corner of a building. As the editor-in-chief of Bottle, Yoshida would naturally not be stupid enough to accuse him. Everyone present knew that the editor-in-chief was completely dragged into the water by a middle-class cartoonist, and went to argue with Makoto Takahashi? It's not that Yoshida, who is fighting against the five scum, has never considered such a tempting idea, but his soul, which has been tempered by many dark histories, unconsciously whined when Yoshida first had this idea, specifically in the form of whole body. The trembling way reacted on Yoshida's body, allowing Yoshida to instantly regain the remaining sanity from the edge of anger. So at this moment, Yoshida really has no better choice besides silence, right? Under the gazes of everyone on the cartoonist and editor sides as if they were watching a show, Makoto Takahashi stopped negotiating with the editor-in-chief of Bottle and began to slowly walk towards Yoshida. Ahem, this time it really wasn't aimed at Yoshida. Didn't I say it before, if you repeatedly play tricks on a certain editor, you will really cripple Yoshida, the Phoenix Academy fierce dependent cat? My beloved cat, get out of the way, you're blocking my most important trump card. Makoto Takahashi ignored the complicated expression of a certain editor in charge, but directly pushed Yoshida away and walked behind Yoshida. Yachin Mumanji's gay friends said, "Good gay friends, don't shrink back. Now it's your turn to appear." It's our turn. The two good friends looked at each other and nodded tacitly. The man with yellow hair and glasses asked, "Speaking of Cheng, what do you want us to do?" "Well, stand behind me, pretending to be a background wall. This is the explanation from the outside world. Secretly release your momentum and intimidate the commander, so that I can gain an absolute advantage in the following conversation." According to the explanation from the outside world, the explanation, that should be it. Takahashi Makoto, are you sure you can understand your explanation? Sorry Cheng, could you please repeat what you just said? Landai, did you squander all the talent points originally used to increase your IQ in order to improve your painting skills? Life is not a big pineapple game with a big box of patches. Adding some random patches is not enough. No, Supreme, you should say this. Huang Mao's glasses, sorry, a certain Huang Mao is wiping his glasses at the moment, so I have to correct the original title. Cheng, please repeat what you just said in a language that humans can understand. You can't even understand such a simple way of communication. Speaking of gay friends, are you really cartoonists? What about your incredible imagination? What about your abnormal thinking patterns that are beyond normal human beings? Your overflowing gay feelings? What about the philosophical thinking mode? Takahashi Makoto's exclusive taunting and taunting skill was activated, allowing the pair of good friends Ajumumenha to directly enter the Orts mode. Watching with the tangled look on the face of his good friend Yachin Mumenjai, Takahashi Makoto instantly felt a huge amount of pleasure, but then he sighed helplessly and sighed quietly. After all these years of training, you are actually able to. I am so disappointed that I am still at the stage of ordinary people. However, for the sake of this cooperation, I will make an exception and explain it to you again in terms that your stupid wisdom can understand. I'm really grateful. Akin Mumenjai's gnashing of teeth was automatically made up by a middle-level cartoonist as a typical expression of tired. What a cruel mind-making ability this is. I want to think about what to say first. Makoto Takahashi pondered for a moment, and his eyes accidentally glanced at the soul of the game manga manuscript Ajumumenha put on the table, and he suddenly showed a wicked smile. Haha, let's use your new serial as an analogy. Now I am like Xiao Guang, and Commander Sama, let's just think of him as Xiao Liang. Although in terms of age and appearance, Commander Sama does not have a baby face. The shelf life of the shot has already passed. Hey, Takahashi Makoto, don't forget that the commander you mentioned over there is still waiting for your explanation. Are you really a real man when you complain about the editor-in-chief of Bottle in such a tone of stating facts? The communication between the commander and I is just like the two gay friends Xiao Guang and Xiao Liang in the comics who met for the first time and used go to play chess to cover up the sexual conflict. The role of the good gay friends as you are, it's like same as Zoe, with his unnoticed background status, he releases the pressure of a strong man and makes the commander fearful. It is best to make the commander surrender in the middle of the negotiation. Makoto Takahashi looked stunned. A good group of gay friends, curled his lips in displeasure. Do you understand what I said? Tisk, in order to let you stupid mortals understand the battle plan, it caused me to have some unpleasant thoughts about the upcoming negotiations. Humph, if this negotiation fails, good gay friends, I swear in the name of the Phoenix Academy, I will definitely use all means to make you truly transform into good gay friends. Us. Hey, now is not the time for you to think about life. Didn't you see that the commander over there is impatient with the waiting? Seeing Ajumumenha's dull look, Takahashi Makoto was furious. He roared, "Oh, forget it. You just need to stand quietly behind me and pretend that you are a bodyguard in black or a thug. Anyway, don't think too much, it's time to end everything." No, in fact, the editor-in-chief of the Bottle was waiting patiently. At least when Makoto Takahashi was making plans for Ajumumenha, the editor-in-chief of the Bottle was observing the manga manuscripts stacked on the table with relish. Is your communication over? Seeing Takahashi Makoto and Ajumumenha approaching him, the Bottle editor put down the comic manuscript and looked at the three of them with interest. Then, think about what to do. Did you say it? The Weekly Shonen Jump once had a glorious history. Makoto Takahashi, who really used Ajumumenha as the background wall, took a deep breath and said in a slightly serious tone. That's right. It was the serial meeting that year that can be recorded in history. Oh, the editor-in-chief of Bottle looked at Makoto Takahashi in surprise. Makoto Takahashi, you actually know about this? Humph, don't underestimate our Phoenix Academy's ruthless intelligence network. Makoto Takahashi raised his head and snorted coldly, continuing the topic. In that serialization meeting that year, the editor submitted it to the new serialization meeting. His comics include Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, Bleach, and Fist of the North Star. Am I right? And it was at that serialization meeting that the commander-in-chief at the time made great efforts to overcome the objections of the public, breaking the quantity limit of previous serialization conventions and including all those comics into weekly serialization. Only then did the Weekly Shonen Jump stand out from many comic weekly magazines and complete the special achievement of dominating the comics industry. However, the glory has long passed, and the glory has become history. So you want to? Just as the commander-in-chief thought, Makoto Takahashi showed a hint of fanaticism in his eyes. On behalf of everyone on the manga side, I would like to declare that we are not launching the great brawl among the manga artists on a whim. It's not a deliberate act of destruction, but a desire to recreate the glory of that past while still respecting it. Today is the winter solstice, and the counting of 9 begins. Dear readers, please pay attention to keep warm and prevent the cold. When observing the novel, please don't forget to get up, pour a glass of water, and do some activities. Above. Meow. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 507. Events that can be recorded as brilliant, naturally created, praiseworthy glory in their era. Just like the weekly issue of Shonen Jump that year, it also serialized several comics that had a huge impact on later generations, and I'm afraid no one thought about the behavior of the weekly editorial department at that time. Will it be the most brilliant step in dominance of the comic industry in the future? Like heroic spirits, they will be sung and praised by humans. Major events that can be remembered will naturally be talked about by humans afterwards and become the best examples to imitate and learn from. But human beings' heartfelt admiration for past history and great figures is originally a very good and praiseworthy thing. However, being too superstitious about past glory will make human beings gradually abandon their own individuality. Gradually sinking into the so-called glory, Makoto Takahashi was swiping his brush on the manuscript paper and performing the exclusive work of a cartoonist at high speed, while speaking in a serious voice that his assistant Uncle Tintin had rarely heard, filled with this madness and the devil's breath's exclusive language for the second grade. Faced with the rapidly changing society, not only do we not want to make progress, but we cling to the glory of the past and praise the glory of the past. It is more important than the collapse of faith. What's serious is that you are indulging in the so-called glory and glory without knowing it. Excuse me for a moment, Cheng. There is nothing wrong with admiring the glory of the past and worshipping the glory of the past. Makoto Takahashi ignored the look on Uncle Tintin's face that was about to collapse, as if he was preaching and talking to himself, as if there were no other people. He continued, but holding such innocent and childish ideals as I have achieved such brilliant achievements and I have brought such glory, although it seems to be a sign of confidence on the surface, however, at best, it is just a poor performance of being addicted to the so-called brilliance and glory and not dare to face the reality. It is just an excuse to avoid self-deception in life. Aiken, I said. Someone once said that weakness is the original sin of mankind. However, in my opinion, vanity is the real original sin of mankind. The only ones who are really at fault are the humans who are addicted to it, as the words of a middle school cartoonist fell. At this time, the paintbrush in Takahashi Makoto's hand also completed the last stroke and stopped in mid-air. Except for the reverberating roar of Makoto Takahashi's strong Chuyuni aura, the whole room fell into an eerie silence. Speaking of Aiken, hasn't the editor-in-chief already agreed to your previous request? Why are you still? Uncle Tintin must not have looked at the almanac when he went out today. What he wanted to say was once again not said out? The previous 2 times were due to the negligence of a middle-class cartoonist, but this time. Ever since Chenkun debuted, he always behaves like this every time he encounters something very important. After serving a cup of coffee, Rina smiled awkwardly and explained to Uncle Tintin, who looked helpless, although I don't want to admit it, but this has indeed become Chenkun's habit, so I'm sorry, Tintin-san. This is really an incredible habit. But there is no need to say sorry or anything. Ding Ding looked over at Makoto Takahashi, who seemed to have entered the legendary comprehension state and finally calmed down. Afterwards, he shook his head helplessly and said with a wry smile, I've long been used to Aiken being like this. Besides, compared to this, I think Aiken was throwing himself on the table to draw comics while making a terrifying laugh. That kind of scene is even more scary, especially when you have to stay up late to finish the comic manuscript. Uh, this, it seems like this. Although Uncle Tintin was just stating a fact, after listening to it, Rena seemed to have recalled something, and the look on her face became even more embarrassed. Rena was not thinking of the dark history that she had been frightened by, but she was thinking of Miss Aoi Ueno, who was once one of Takahashi Makoto's assistants. The assistant who was full of arrogance was frightened by Makoto Takahashi many times and did not dare to go home, so he had to stay here at night. Speaking of which, the reason why Miss Aoi Ueno became Shizukawa's assistant may be due to this reason, right? Which, you are still wandering around in the barrier at this time. Makoto Takahashi seemed to have broken away from the state of comprehension and looked at Rena, who was talking to Uncle Tintin, feeling a little dissatisfied. He complained, "Didn't I ask you to meditate for 3 days before? Why now, the time shouldn't be up yet, right? I'm just participating in voice actor training. 3 days of rest is too much, I'm not as delicate as Chen-kun thinks." Rena put the remaining cup of coffee in front of Takahashi Makoto, "And it's even better than speaking of me, Chen-kun, are you more miserable? And which Rena, don't forget that your profession is a witch, not a maid. This kind of thing can be handled by Sabas-chan." Makoto Takahashi drank the love coffee offered by Rena in one gulp. After that, he ignored Uncle Tintin standing aside and stood up directly in front of Rena, and then the ferocious level skill princess hug is activated. "Makoto-kun," Rena's face immediately turned crimson, and she muttered dissatisfiedly, "As for the tone used by Rena, it should be the so-called shy, right? I know." Takahashi Makoto stopped Rena from finishing her words, stared into her eyes, and said with a guilty tone, "I've been busy with Super Smash Bros. Recently, so, I'm sorry, which?" "Yeah, it's okay." Rena put her arms around Takahashi Makoto's neck, put her head close to Takahashi Makoto's ear, and whispered, "It's Makoto's job to complete the comics. I can understand, and I don't mean to blame Makoto. It's just that sometimes. I suddenly want to see you who have completed the comics seriously, and look at the you that I love the most seriously, that's all." Although there are some things that Rena didn't say, but Takahashi Makoto can understand. "Hey, which, let's exchange equal value." Takahashi Makoto stopped and looked at Rena in his arms seriously. After pondering for a long time, he finally said loudly, "I'll give you half of my life, and you give me half of your life." "I. Ha 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 ha, Makoto-kun, you're really..." Rena suddenly laughed and gently hit Takahashi Makoto's chest. "At this time, don't steal the lines of the comic characters you created." "But Makoto-kun, I really feel your intentions." "Tisk." Makoto Takahashi turned his head away unhappily. Well, I'm cooperating with you in voice actor training." Hey. I know, Makoto-kun, you're really not honest enough." "Tisk, you have the ability to read minds, should I say you're really a witch? You're really not cute at all." "Isn't Makoto-kun just like me like this?" After watching Makoto Takahashi holding Rena and leaving the living room, Uncle Ding Ding complained dissatisfiedly after a brief silence, Don't think that showing affection in front of me will cause me great harm. I also have a wife and children." "No. Uncle Ding Ding, the tone of your speech sounds like you've received 10,000 points of critical damage. Is it an illusion? Do you want to know why the salary of assistants under Makoto Takahashi is higher than that of assistants under other cartoonists? Because in addition to completing normal work, I also need to be responsible for complaining about a certain middle school manga artist, and endure the combined combat skills of a certain middle school devil and a certain witch love kill. Merry Christmas Eve. It's really great that there is no power outage tonight. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 508. This fantasy of yours, let me crush it. As soon as Yujiro opened the door, he saw his new wife Ag in a white coat standing on a chair, holding the manga manuscript in both hands, making this declaration: if he hadn't learned that Takahashi Makoto was waiting at home before coming here Yoshida, Yujiro thought that a certain middle-class manga artist appeared in Eiji Shinzuma's studio. This classic line from Kamijutuma, no matter how many times I say it, I still find it very exciting. Eiji Nizuma didn't care about his shaky footing. He held the manga manuscript in his arms and exclaimed with excitement, being able to the teacher from Phoenix Academy who created this comic is really amazing. I am really touched to be able to participate in the completion of this comic. Nizuma-kun. Although he was somewhat reluctant to choose to talk to Nizuma Ag at this time, as a qualified editor, Yujiro still spoke with a sense of duty and loyalty. It's Yujiro-san. Ag Nizuma jumped down from his chair and looked at his editor-in-chief expectantly. Is the serialization meeting over? It's over. Hearing the new wife Ag take the initiative to bring up the serialization meeting, Yujiro wanted to continue the topic. Originally Yujiro was right to think so. But after seeing the white coat that Ag Nizuma was wearing, Yujiro finally couldn't help but ask, let's not talk about the serialization meeting. By the way, Nizuma-kun, is this the white coat you are wearing? Oh, this is Shinheiken's exclusive uniform. According to the Phoenix Academy teacher, since we are allies, and since we share the name Shinheiken, we should have a unified uniform. That's okay. Ag, the new wife, pulled up his white coat and gave the same explanation as Yujiro expected, then asked about the serialization meeting again. So Yujiro-san, the result of the serialization meeting is, how to say good? It's good and bad, I guess. Recalling what happened at the previous serialization meeting, Yujiro turned away his head unnaturally. What is the specific situation? After Fukuda comes, I'll explain it to you in detail. In short, the good news is that the editor-in-chief has agreed to the previous proposal of Master Jujhen of the Phoenix Academy to serialize 6 new series at the same time. It's exactly what the Phoenix Academy teacher expected. Eiji Shinzuma returned to his desk and handed the compiled manga manuscript to Yujiro. So, regarding the serialization time, will it start next week? I confirm that I have received the first chapter of the Manga Hero Academia. After Yujiro took the manga manuscript, he looked through it casually, then organized the manga manuscript again, put it into the document bag he carried with him, and at the same time, under the eager eyes of Nizuma Ag, he slowly said, the serialization time will indeed start next week, but, in short, I will explain everything in detail to you after Fukuda comes here. Tisk, Yujiro-san is really stingy. After several unsuccessful inquiries, the pouting new wife Ag complained softly. At the same time, Yoshida, who had just finished explaining everything that happened at the serialization meeting, was carefully observing a certain middle-class cartoonist, and at the same time anxiously awaiting the next reaction of a certain middle-class cartoonist. The situation is like this. He didn't go berserk as Yoshida had expected. He didn't pull out the magic sword and prepare to bloodbath the weekly editorial department as Yoshida had expected. He didn't make the usual arrogant Chuyuni declaration. Takahashi Makoto finished listening to what Yoshida said. After everything, I just played silent without saying a word. Chen, are you really, okay? What is the calm before the storm? Looking at Makoto Takahashi's face at this moment, Yoshida now truly understands the true meaning of this word. So, is it because of your colleagues that made the commander put forward those conditions? Makoto Takahashi squinted at Yoshida and sighed helplessly. The human heart is like this. Once something happens, a little dissatisfaction can easily grow into an ugly murderous intention. Indeed what Colonel Chu said was right. Well, although this statement is a bit exaggerated, it does make sense. Halfway through Yoshida's words, he saw Makoto Takahashi staring at him blankly, and he suddenly felt a chill. He asked nervously, what's wrong? Chen, did I say something wrong? My beloved cat, you actually know Colonel Chu? I don't see that your circle of friends is quite wide. Huh? I just followed what you said. Besides, what you just said is not only very consistent with the current situation, but also very reasonable. Tisk, I thought that world pronounced as Lord God and written as Great Light Sphere really existed. By the way, what are those settings? Chen, your new comic? A little is enough. By the way, Chen, why are you looking at me like that? Hey, my beloved cat, every time you mention something that you can't understand, you will always think of new comics at the first time. Although it is a bit late to say it at this time, it is said that as long as if you give up treatment, there is still a possibility of cure. Every time he talks about serious matters, he will habitually make various complaints. Of course, this is just Yoshida's understanding. For Makoto Takahashi, this is just a simple daily side task of completing Get Pleasure from your own editor every day. By the way, this is the exclusive communication mode between Takahashi Makoto and Yoshida. So, after successfully teasing Yoshida, completing daily side tasks, and gaining enough pleasure, Makoto Takahashi took the initiative to talk to Yoshida about serious matters, which was what the editor-in-chief of Bottle said at the serialization meeting not long ago. Those conditions made. Now, my beloved cat, let's ignore those stupid humans at the serial meeting who are looking for trouble and hiding behind the commander to fuel the flames. What do you think of the commander's conditions? Makoto Takahashi was sorting out One Punch Man. I promise not to laugh at you because of your mortal level stupid wisdom, so, my beloved cat, please speak freely. In addition to agreeing to those conditions and starting serialization, you can also choose to give up. With my stupid wisdom at the level of an ordinary person, I can only think of these two options at most. Faced with Takahashi Makoto's ridicule and complaints, after years of hard work, Yoshida has already mastered the countermeasures. Of course, Yoshida did not forget to express his own opinions, although as the editor-in-chief of a weekly, I shouldn't say this, but to be honest, I think those conditions are too much. Harsh, no, it should be said that it is too overwhelming. Harsh? Making things difficult for others. Ha 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 ha. Under the incomprehensible look in Yoshida's eyes, Takahashi Makoto suddenly laughed wildly. My beloved is a cat, you haven't understood yet, those so-called conditions are just the commander is just testing us. Testing? After Yoshida pondered for a moment, he looked at Makoto Takahashi in surprise and asked, are you saying, Chen? That's right, this is a test from the commander. Makoto Takahashi's face was full of smiles at this moment, and his eyes were burning with fighting spirit that surprised Yoshida. If you don't have a firm consciousness and a strong will, then what qualifications do you have? To challenge the glory of the past, what qualifications do we have to create glory that is no less than the past? My guess is that you readers should have finished celebrating Christmas, right, in every sense of the word laughs. Although it's a little late, I wish you a Merry Christmas. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 509. This is basically the situation, haha. Editor Hattori took a sip of the teacup and continued slowly, although from the perspective of the editor-in-chief, I do not recommend that you choose to serialize during this period, but I think even if I say so, I'm afraid you won't agree, right? Of course, Yashiro Mumenji did not deny editor Hattori's statement. Although the editor-in-chief Hattori wanted to persuade the good friend group out of good intentions, but, no matter what difficulties he faced, no matter what harsh conditions he faced, Yashiro Mumenji never thought of giving up serialization. This was a choice that the two had decided at the beginning. Thank you Mr. Hattori for your kindness and care for us. It's not about taking care of us, I just told you my thoughts as the editor-in-chief. He. After a pause, editor Hattori once again emphasized the conditions proposed by editor Pingzi at the serialization meeting. Takagi-kun, Mashiro-kun, since you have chosen to participate in the serialization, you must complete the tasks proposed by the editor-in-chief. During the publication of the new serialization, the ranking of the reader survey cannot be lower than the 10th position for 3 consecutive times. Muttering and repeating the conditions conveyed by editor Hattori before, Mr. Yellow-Haired Glasses pushed his glasses, that, Hattori sir, if we don't do it, will the new serialized comic be cut short? Although the editor-in-chief didn't say it clearly at the time, but Hattori scratched his head, a tangled look on his face, and after pondering for a long time, he said reluctantly, actually, I don't really want to tell you, but since you asked, I will convey the editor-in-chief's original words. If you can't even do this, then what qualifications do you have to occupy the serialization position, and what qualifications do you have to say that? The editor-in-chief's original words are almost like this, so if you don't complete the task set by the editor-in-chief, I think the new series will definitely be cut short. It is indeed the worst result. Be a man, feeling the atmosphere become a little awkward, editor Hattori comforted, if we really compare, the pressure on Mr. Feng Guangyuan is greater, right? After all, as the mastermind who proposed to serialize multiple new comics at the same time. Is the task that Makoto needs to complete more difficult than ours? Well, in addition to the same task as all cartoonists, the ranking in the reader survey cannot be lower than the 10th position 3 times in a row. The editor-in-chief also specifically asked Mr. Feng Guangyuan to take the first place at least once within 1 year of starting serialization. Makoto Takahashi was very happy about this. Editor Hattori did not gloat over the misfortune of the same treatment, nor was he kind-hearted like a goody-goody. He still spoke to Yashiro and Mumanjai in a normal tone, although this extra task for you doesn't sound very difficult, I think you, as cartoonists, should know this the most. By the way, Takagi-kun, Mashiro-kun, you have all read the comic manuscript of Feng Guangyuan's new comic One Punch Man, right? How do you feel about that comic? Well, we did read it, and we read it twice. The good friends nodded in acknowledgement. When they were about to tell their impressions of the comic, they were interrupted by the surprised editor Hattori. Wait. You actually read the new series of Mr. Feng Guangyuan twice? Editor Hattori stared at his good friends, Yachin Mumanjai, with some doubts, and said with some disbelief, the comic that you can watch twice, it seems that you also find this new series of Mr. Feng Guangyuan's One Punch Man very interesting. If this is true, then it seems that it should be possible to achieve the task proposed by the editor-in-chief. Did I say something wrong? Why are you looking at me like this? That. Landai stuttered for a long time, and then under the teasing eyes of his good friends and the curious eyes of editor Hattori, he spoke out the real reason for observing the comic manuscript twice. The reason why we watched the comic manuscript twice is actually mainly because the comic manuscript that Ah Chang showed us at the beginning was the kind of style that belongs to a very magical style, right? Fully magical. Editor Hattori couldn't understand Landai's word for modification. Meijo-kun, can you tell me in detail, or just imitate that style and draw some for me? Imitate that style? Thinking back to the original comics of One Punch Man he had observed before, Landai showed a very reluctant expression on his face, and then began to use silence to cover up his embarrassment. It's not that Landai can't draw it. After all, it's actually very easy for a cartoonist like Landai, who has been serializing for many years, to draw a comic that is completely unprofessional. It's just that asking a professional cartoonist to draw a comic that is quite unprofessional, and can even be regarded as graffiti at best, Landai feels that his professional soul as a cartoonist is crying and wailing. Is that style of painting difficult to imitate? Can't you even draw Mr. Mashiro? Regarding Landay's silence, editor Hattori obviously thought too much and thought that that style of painting was too much. It's so complicated that even Landay, who has improved his painting skills rapidly after his debut, can't complete it. By the way, if the two good friends Ajumomenha tell you the truth later, don't cry out, Uncle Hattori. Ha 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 ha. Knowing that the Hattori editor had misunderstood, the man with yellow-haired glasses could no longer hold back his smile and began to laugh out loud unkindly. Eh? What's going on? Looking at the yellow-haired man with glasses who suddenly smiled, editor Hattori was a little confused. Did I say something wrong? No, Mr. Hattori, you misunderstood. Classmate Landai tried to suppress his good friend with sad and angry eyes, but the visual effect was not very good. Ignoring the various tricks of his good friend to suppress his smile, classmate Landai he helplessly spread his hands towards the confused editor Hattori and started to explain. Mr. Hattori should have seen Akito's completed storyboard, right? Well, as your editor-in-chief, I have naturally seen the storyboards completed by Mr. Takagi. Are there any questions? As for the painting style of the One Punch Man comic manuscript that we saw back then, a more vivid metaphor is. Turning to the yellow-haired glasses guy who was still covering his mouth and snickering, Landai did not hesitate to say, okay, my gay friend is sold. The style of painting is similar to the storyboard drafts completed by Akito. Silence. Editor Hattori fell into a state of silence because he suddenly heard this shocking truth. Although Mr. Hattori, you may not believe it, but the manga manuscript we saw back then was exactly like that. The yellow-haired glasses man finally stopped smiling, thinking of the magical one punch that he had observed before. Superman comic manuscript. I couldn't help but laugh again. I remember that in order to let Cheng revise the comic manuscript, Mr. Yoshida would keep talking to Cheng every time he had the opportunity. Then, have you read the One Punch Man manga draft revised by Mr. Phoenix Institute? Instead of going crazy like the two good friends Ajumomenha, editor Hattori remembered the previous serialization meeting. What happened? His tone immediately became serious. Originally, I didn't plan to tell you what happened at the serialization meeting, because in my opinion, that incident might dampen your enthusiasm. You know that here at the serialization meeting, how did we all evaluate the 6 works this time? Could it be that Cheng's One Punch Man is the most promising new serial, right? Looking at Hattori's editor's expression, the man with yellow-haired glasses had already vaguely guessed what the other person wanted to say next, and immediately he suppressed his smile, exchanged glances with his good friend beside him, and then asked, so where is Eiji Arizuma's Hero Academia? Where is our ghost? The 6 new comics submitted this time will be serialized in a new series starting from next week's weekly. Although the editor-in-chief has proposed some tasks and asked us to seek the opinions of the cartoonists in charge, I would like to submit the cartoonists who have signed up for the new serialization should agree to and complete the tasks set by the editor-in-chief and join in this weekly serialization that is different from the past, editor Hattori finally said after briefly telling what happened at the serialization meeting. Turning to the topic that Yachin Mumenjai is most interested in. According to the practice of previous serialization conferences, if the number of newly submitted comics exceeds the number required for serialization, in addition to the comics selected for serialization, the remaining outstanding new comics will generally be included in serialization among the candidates. When there are suitable opportunities for serialization in the future, we will give priority to these works. Mr. Hattori means. Although it is impolite to interrupt others at will, the yellow-haired glasses man no longer cares about it. What if according to previous practice, our Soul of Chess can only be included in the serial candidates? Although it is a bit cruel to you, it is true. After editor Hattori finished speaking, he saw that the yellow-haired glasses man was a little frustrated, and immediately spoke to comfort him. Of course, this does not mean that your comics are better than it's someone else's fault. You know, it's very common for this to happen at serialization conferences. What about Eiji Arizuma's Hero Academia and Cheng's One Punch Man? Lande was not disappointed because of this matter. Instead, he asked Hattori editor about what he had always regarded as must be surpassed the two people who are targeting. Although they are asking Hattori editor, Lande-san has already vaguely guessed the answer. Could it be that? So I didn't really want to tell you just now. Seeing the depressed expressions of the good friends in front of him, editor Hattori felt a little embarrassed and deliberately started to change the topic in order to lighten the atmosphere. The manga manuscripts submitted by Phoenix-sensei, Shinsuma-sensei, and Hiromaru-sensei all received high evaluations at the serialization meeting. Especially the manga by Phoenix-sensei and Shinsuma-sensei. The plots of the comics have similar themes, but the protagonists have completely opposite settings of being extremely strong and extremely weak. These two comics have similarities but also have strong contrasts. For other cartoonists who serialized at the same time, to put it simply, it can be described as disaster. That's why I just said that if possible, I don't really want you to submit a new series at this time. Editor Hattori reiterated his point of view and didn't say the rest of the words, because, hey, Supreme, I didn't expect that we would fall behind at the beginning of this duel. Yes, Akito. So what should we do next? The goal should be clear, right? Then we will catch up from this disadvantage at the beginning and try our best. The fists of the good friends collided together, and they said in unison, until we completely surpass them. The fighting spirit of Yashiro Mumanjai at this time can already explain everything. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao-do Sde Mao. Chapter 510. Cutting off 6 comics in one go, and then replacing them with 6 new serials, this is undoubtedly a move with great impact for the weekly Shonen Jump. Makoto Takahashi successfully convinced the editor-in-chief of Bottle, and then the editor-in-chief of Bottle also successfully convinced all the editorial staff at the serialization meeting. The attitude shown by the cartoonist and editor during this period can definitely be modified with confidence. However, when the issue of the weekly Shonen Jump that serialized 6 new comics actually started to go on sale, the editor-in-chief of Bottle did not behave as calmly as at the previous serialization meeting. Although the statistical results will not be known until a week later, there are still other ways to judge that this decision is reasonable. For example, during the week of waiting for the statistical results, you can specifically speculate on the success or failure of this decision by observing the changes in weekly sales. If the sales volume of the weekly magazine this time is significantly higher than before, then it can be judged that this decision was not wrong, but if the sales volume of the weekly magazine is significantly lower than before, it means that this time it was targeted by someone. The second cartoonist tricked not only the editor-in-chief of Bottle, but also the editorial side of the entire weekly magazine. So although the editor-in-chief of Bottle still looks the same as usual today, maintaining the state of silent facial paralysis as always, every member of the editorial side who came to the editorial headquarters this morning can clearly feel the atmosphere of the office. It was too repressive. In such an atmosphere, every member on the editorial side moved cautiously and cautiously. And those who accidentally make some noise will not only feel the malicious eyes of their colleagues around them for the first time, but also because of the intimidating gaze of the editor-in-chief of Bottle. The duration of the entry is not very clear in the state of being on tenterhooks or big horror. The few editors in charge, who are well aware that the editorial base camp has fallen into such an atmosphere, have neither the ability to change the status quo nor the way to invigorate the atmosphere. Therefore, they can only, like other colleagues, try to remain quiet and immersed in their work while still thinking in their hearts. Keep giving yourself hints such as this situation will only last for a week at most and just endure it for a week. If everyone on the editorial side is trying to understand how painful the agony of waiting is, then the situation on the reader side is much more complicated. Among the readers who bought this issue of the weekly magazine, there are many who have thoughts such as, is this new serial really good, and is that new comic really interesting? After all, this will happen every time a new serial is published. If the comics that the readers observe are not as exciting as they expected, they will feel disappointed. In more serious cases, they may even start to produce problems similar to a decline in the level of cartoonists, weekly magazines, etc. The editor did not review it carefully and other disgusting feelings. No matter how excellent a comic is, there will still be readers who hate its existence. In the same way, no matter how much criticism and complaints a comic has from readers, there will still be some fanatical believers. So even though the 6 works that were cut in half are relatively low popular comics in the weekly and ranked at the bottom of the readership survey, but please don't forget the number of readers the weekly has. Therefore, even if a comic is not popular, there will naturally be some strong supporters among the huge reader base. So on the day when the weekly magazine went on sale, some readers found out that instead of continuing to publish their favorite comics in the past, they began to serialize new comics. They were a little emotionally conflicted, and that's natural. However, there are also readers who, after observing the comics, feel that the comics are more exciting than they expected, and then start the no regrets mode to follow the comics. After Ryo Taniguchi picked up the latest issue of the weekly Shonen Jump, he did not eagerly open the package and flip through the comics like most readers did, but chose to carefully observe the catalog of the weekly. This is Ryo Taniguchi's habit. Every time before observing a weekly, he will check out the new comics in the weekly. What's going on with this issue of the weekly magazine? There are so many unfamiliar names, all new serials. When he looked through the catalog, he saw several unfamiliar names, which briefly surprised Taniguchi Ryo. After that, he closed the weekly Shonen Jump full of doubts and wanted to check whether he bought the wrong comic magazine through the cover. They actually released 6 new serials in one go. The editorial department of the weekly is really generous. But these new comics, can serialization really support this issue of the weekly? It seems that the reason why the Demon Count, which I thought was pretty good before, was hastily finished last week is largely because of this issue. Make room for the new series. Why does Ryo Taniguchi know so much about these things? You must know that many readers are not very familiar with the serialization rules of weekly magazines. There are many issues such as the requirements for serialization of new comics, the conditions for comics to be cut in half, the reasons for the hasty ending of comics, etc. Every time they encounter these situations, the editorial staff have to ask the readers to be patient over and over again. Analysis, however, this situation has changed a lot after the completion of a certain comic series. To put it simply, since the serialization of that comic ended, readers have a new understanding of the weekly serialization method. Not only do we no longer ask the same questions again and again as before, but sometimes the analysis given by the editorial staff is more professional and detailed. That's right, that comic is based on Ajumu Menha's inspirational comic depicting the cartoonist, Dream Eater. By observing the comic Dream Eater many times, not only did the number of manuscripts received by the weekly Shonen Jump increase every week, it also made many readers familiar with the weekly serialization model. If it weren't for a certain middle-level comic, if your family is too capable of causing trouble, maybe the magazine will give you an award or something to express your gratitude to Takahashi Makoto. By the way, I would like to emphasize that the following sentence is the original words of the editor-in-chief of Bottle and editor-in-chief Sasaki. So all this is Steins Gate? No, it's because of the influence of the comic Dream Eater. Since the weekly magazine dared to publish 6 new serials in one go this time, it means that the 6 new serials are all very interesting, so Ryo Taniguchi, who was full of curiosity, only after a brief surprise, began to struggle with which one to read first. A new series. You must know that releasing 6 new serials at once is definitely a malicious act for readers who have difficulty in choosing. By the way, Makoto Takahashi definitely did not consider this at the beginning. Emphasis on the request to have 6 comics serialized at the same time. However, when Ryo Taniguchi finally made up his mind and set his sights on the first new comic series, he accidentally discovered something horrifying. Turning directly to the serialization part of the comic One Punch Man, Ryo Taniguchi saw a unique cover page. Different from other comics, the cover page of the comic One Punch Man does not reveal any appearance of the protagonist. Instead, it shows a huge fist wearing gloves. For this comic to use such a strange cover page that is so different from the past, Ryo Taniguchi's curiosity was naturally aroused. However, just when Ryo Taniguchi was about to start observing comics, he discovered that in the comic's author column, the name of the cartoonist filled in was Phoenix in Murder. Hey! This new serialization of One Punch Man is actually the new work of the cartoonist Phoenix Institute. By the way, isn't that guy's most recent main battlefield in the monthly magazine? Why is it in the weekly magazine again this time? Are you planning to come to last week to dig holes in people again? In recent years, every reader who has observed the weekly Shonen Jump naturally knows that among the cartoonists serialized in the weekly, there is a cartoonist who enjoys killing readers. There is such a legend among readers. A certain cartoonist's favorite and most disgusting thing is that every time he starts to serialize a comic plot that has a plot, he will wear a white coat and wander around the streets on the day when the weekly magazine is released, observing the people who are attracted by him. The reader's side of the comic plot is full of tangled expressions to gain pleasure. And the cartoonist who has become the urban legend White Coat Demon is the author of the first work in this weekly series, the comic One Punch Man, Phoenix Academy Fierce Man. According to common sense, a cartoonist with such a bad character like Hohoin Kuma would have been punched to death by readers long ago, or he would have been boycotted by readers because of his too evil behavior, but this guy happened to. The comics created are quite exciting, and it is easy for readers to indulge in them inadvertently. Therefore, every large-scale team activity organized spontaneously by readers to conquer the devil in white coat would turn into an internal fight due to the influence of the comics, and eventually had to be abandoned. So it's understandable that when Ryo Taniguchi saw that the manga artist was the Honen Murasaki, he would be surprised and turn on the full of resentment complaint mode. All of these are the sins of a certain middle-class cartoonist when he was young. No, it should be Stein's Gate. The beginning of the comic One Punch Man is full of explosion special effects. No, those are not special effects. There was a violent explosion in the city. The city that originally looked very prosperous with tall buildings turned into ruins in the next picture. As for the human beings living in the city, I'm afraid it's best to describe them as dead bodies everywhere. And after the villain who caused such a tragedy appeared on the scene, Ryo Taniguchi almost scratched his eyeball. It's not that this villain caused another explosion after appearing on the stage and wiped out many humans, but because of the appearance of this villain. Holy crap! Isn't this guy Piccolo the Great? Is he really a real man who let the devil Piccolo wander in at the beginning of the comic? Hey, this comic of Phoenix Academy, is it Dragon Ball or One Punch Man? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 511. This guy is definitely not Piccolo. After carefully observing the comics where this character appeared, Ryo Taniguchi finally came to this conclusion. However, this kind of character setting which is easy to misread at first sight, Ryo Taniguchi can be sure that the reason why this character who appeared at the beginning of the comic One Punch Man was drawn in this style similar to Piccolo was definitely intentional by a middle school cartoonist. The appearance of such a monster in the city where humans live is definitely a disaster for humans. So in the comics, the city's general broadcast began to issue evacuation orders, asking humans to evacuate, and then the camera of the comics turned to a hall full of high-tech atmosphere. In the hall that looks like a headquarters in the comics, several staff members are busy running around. Some staff members are responsible for arranging and commanding humans to evacuate, some staff members are responsible for determining the level of the disaster, and some staff members are responsible for contacting heroes around the disaster site to rescue. Evacuation order, disaster level, monsters and heroes. Repeating the keywords seen in the comics, Ryo Taniguchi quickly flipped the comic in his hand. According to the experience summarized from observing comics in the past, at this time, the protagonist should appear to save the crisis, so Ryo Taniguchi is very curious about what kind of character the protagonist of this comic will be. The camera in the comics switched again, this time it became a Black Shadow man, watching the live broadcast of the disaster scene, although Ryo Taniguchi was vaguely certain that the character who just appeared should be the protagonist of this comic. But the comics only drew the back of this character, without any front image, and what made Ryo Taniguchi speechless was that this back also looked inexplicably familiar. Is it the most frequent supporting character in Detective Conan, this time Black Shadow Man? Previously, a villain similar to Piccolo appeared, and the characters that follow will also not appear according to common sense. I should have expected this to happen. Turning over the comic in his hand, Ryo Taniguchi finally saw the positive image of the protagonist, which was originally a happy thing, but hey! Bald head. The male protagonist is actually a bald man. Damn. The setting of Hauer Kyoma is really weird. Looking at the male character with a cloak in the comic, Ryo Taniguchi suddenly felt indescribable melancholy. I have to admit that the way the male protagonist raised his cloak when he appeared, combined with the text note of justice execution, looks very imposing at first glance. But what really makes Ryo Taniguchi feel entangled is not the weird outfit on the male protagonist, but the shiny big bald head. The plot of the comic then switches to the ruins of the city again. The villain who looked like Piccolo found a crying little girl in the ruins of the city. The villain grinned, then stretched out his right hand, ready to crush the little girl. However, the scream that the villain longed to hear did not appear. After opening his palm, he found that the little girl who seemed to be doomed just now was saved by a man in a cloak. The raised cloak, the slightly raised corners of the mouth when smiling, through the different descriptions of several consecutive comics, Ryo Taniguchi, who was observing the comics, understood that the person who saved the little girl at lightning speed was the bald male protagonist who had been complained about by himself before. Oh, appearing at the critical moment and saving others, this is a typical way for a hero to appear. Although this classic routine has appeared for many years, it has to be admitted that it is really handsome to appear in this way. At least for Ryo Taniguchi, this classic way of appearance now has saved a lot of points for the fact that the male protagonist is bald. Who are you? Seeing the human being who was about to die being saved, the villain stared at the big bald head that suddenly popped out and asked. I am a hero who is motivated by interest. The male protagonist who put down the little girl turned around, folded his hands in front of his chest, and said so. In the comics, the villain fell into silence because of the male protagonist's strange answer. Ryo Taniguchi, who was observing the comics, also fell into silence after seeing the male protagonist's face shape clearly. Crisis rescue, what a classic and routine way of appearance. But such a good way of appearance was ruined by the male protagonist's funny face. What about the male protagonist who was said to be both beautiful and intelligent, handsome and domineering? It doesn't matter if he doesn't have a handsome face or a domineering standing posture. He has a bald head that doesn't need lighting, and you can ignore it with some effort, but when he just appeared, he looked awesome when he turned his head and grinned. Why does he look like a joke after his face was revealed? It's just an opening. This manga by Hauer Kyoma is really meant for readers to complain, right? Although he only read the opening chapter, Ryo Taniguchi felt a strong desire to complain in his heart instantly, but fortunately, the last trace of sanity still existed, allowing Ryo Taniguchi to suppress the desire to complain in his heart, put down the manga manuscript and started observe carefully. No, to be precise, you should sense your surroundings and confirm that there is no haunting of the protagonist of urban legends among readers, the devil in white coat. Although he has complained about the comic One Punch Man, this does not mean that Ryo Taniguchi is not curious about the next plot of this comic. But after thinking about the devil in white coat that appeared in a certain urban legend, Taniguchi Ryo fell into a tangled pattern. How about, I'd better go home and read it. After picking up the weekly magazine and walking a few steps, Ryo Taniguchi stopped with a tangled look on his face. After hesitating for a moment, he returned to his previous position and sat down, reading again. When I started reading the comic, I kept saying, "Come out, just show up when you show up." Anyway, it's just a shock at most. More than this, I want to know the next plot development. How will the male protagonist of the comic be, how to defeat that monster? In many comics or novels, whether it is a minor villain or a big villain like the mastermind behind the scenes, before fighting with the protagonist, he will engage in the self-destructive behavior of talking too much. Talkage seems to be a common attribute shared by most villains. Every time they face the protagonist, they always chatter a lot, causing the protagonist to cheat in various ways. Waiting for reinforcements, and then receiving lunch in various tragic circumstances, this is the famous villains die from talking too much theory. Of course, the ultimate villain like the mastermind not only has the common attribute of being talkative, but he will also expose the various conspiracies he has planned and tell the story of the various shady plots he has laid out when he finally confronts the protagonist. The truth of the incident triggered various negative states on the protagonist's side, and then was naturally killed by the protagonist's side in various explosions. This not only conforms to the theory of the villain dies from talking too much, but also hides the will of the universe the villain dies from spoilers. So compared to various villains who are soy-making, the big villain who is the ultimate mastermind behind the scenes, the end result is usually quite tragic. The speech of the male protagonist in the comic also made the enemy villain monster complain. Therefore, what will happen to the villain vaccine man who calls himself the apostle of the will of the earth has already been revealed by Steins Gate. It's decided. While he was constantly criticizing the evils of mankind, the vaccine man became more and more excited as he spoke, and his body shape was also undergoing drastic changes. If this vaccine man made Ryo Taniguchi suspicious when he first appeared on the scene, if it was the big demon King Piccolo who broke in, then vaccine man's ferocious appearance now dispels all Ryo Taniguchi's doubts. The muscles with green veins, the fangs turned out, and the figure is completely larger than before. Just the ferocious appearance of vaccine man after the transformation can make Taniguchi Ryo, who observes comics, feel, now this vaccine man is much stronger than before. After taking a deep breath, Ryo Taniguchi opened the next page of the comic with trembling hands, ready to carefully observe what method the male protagonist would use to fight the stronger vaccine man. In the comics, the bald male protagonist does not seem to be afraid of the ferocious appearance of vaccine man. Facing the vaccine man coming from the shop, the bald male protagonist raised his head, raised his right fist, and struck out at the opponent. Then, no more. There were no fierce battles, no physical fist fights, and no superdimensional showdowns between you and me. The male protagonist just threw out a punch without any fancy, and took out the ferocious-looking vaccine. People were beaten into pieces. Speaking of being beaten into pieces, in a sense, it should be regarded as being beaten to pieces, right? This. The reason why Taniguchi Ryo suddenly burst out with swear words is obvious. He was frightened by the bald male protagonist's simple, violent, and cruel punch. In the comic, the bald male protagonist who punched vaccine man to pieces did not cheer for joy. Instead, he put on a tangled look, stared at the fist he just punched with his eyes closed, and then said, lines that left Ryo Taniguchi and most readers speechless. "I got it done with another punch. Damn it." Then, the first chapter of the comic One Punch Man ends here. Sure enough, the invisible thing is the most deadly thing. Ryo Taniguchi put down the weekly magazine, and after a moment of silence, he sighed in a melancholy tone, "This bald head is really, wait. I remember that there doesn't seem to be, in the manga. After reading the first chapter of the manga, I still don't know the name of the male protagonist. Ryo Taniguchi suddenly remembered an important question, picked up the weekly magazine again, and quickly flipped through the pages he had just finished reading. One Punch Man comic. After a moment, Ryo Taniguchi reluctantly put down the comic in his hand, with a look of being teased on his face, and muttered resentfully, "Now I can confirm this comic, it was really completed by the manga artist Hohoin Kuma. Other than that cartoonist with extremely bad taste, who else would not reveal the name of the protagonist at all in the first episode? Hundan. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 512. The comic that follows the comic One Punch Man is also a new series, that is, the comic My Hero Academia by the comic artist Eiji Nizuma. No one can tell what the editor's idea is for making such an arrangement, but for the readers, they both tell the story of heroes, and they both praise the theme of justice. They are also two comics of similar types. It is easy for readers who observe comics to make comparisons subconsciously when they put them one after the other. However, unlike the comic One Punch Man by a certain middle school cartoonist, in the comic My Hero Academia by Eiji Nizuma, whether it is the name of the protagonist or the reasons for the various special abilities, they are all announced in the first chapter of the comic. The personality mentioned in the comic, in the usual sense, is a name for innate supernormal abilities. The comic also mentions that several years after the first person with a personality was discovered, 80% of the world's human beings now have personalities, that is, superpowers. Because there are quiz that can easily take people's lives, countries have strict regulations to control the use of quiz by humans. As the number of people who abuse quiz to commit crimes has exploded, courageous people have learned from comic stories and started to stand up to fight against the enemy to fight crime, so hero, a profession that could only be imagined and longed for in the past, appeared. And the protagonist of the comic, Izuku Midoriya, a 14-year-old junior high school boy, has longed to become a hero since he was a child. Unlike a certain bald-caped man who became a hero, the protagonist Izuku Midoriya did not regard heroes as a profession driven by interest, but through his fanatical admiration for the number one hero Oram, and he longed to become a hero from the bottom of his heart. Perhaps it was because he was attracted by the handsome figure of the number one hero Oram, and when he saw him saving mankind, or it was because the number one hero Oram and said the handsome line, "It doesn't matter anymore, you ask me why? Because, I'm here," ignited the soul of justice in Izuku Midoriya, or everyone has had a great hero dream, dreaming of becoming a hero, dreaming of fighting evil villains, dreaming of maintaining world peace, dreaming of becoming a partner of justice. Izuku Midoriya, who has always liked Oram and since childhood, basically watches the video of Oram and saving people every day. Perhaps it was at that time that Izuku Midoriya began to look forward to becoming a hero like Oram and so handsome. If my quirk awakens, I can also become a hero like that, right? Seeing Izuku Midoriya, who is still a child in the comics, say this, many readers who observe the comics also began to guess what kind of quirk the comic artist Eiji Nizuma will arrange for the male protagonist to awaken next. However, just as a certain villain once said, longing is the most distant existence. So the plot arranged by the comics next, is to give this male protagonist who is full of hope and yearning a hard slap in the face. Because many kindergarten children have awakened their quirks and have superpowers, but the protagonist Izuku Midoriya has not shown any signs of awakening, so Izuku Midoriya's mother took her child who was eager to awaken his quirks to the hospital for a checkup. It's better to give up, after the examination, the doctor told Izuku Midoriya this cruel result with a calm face. Izuku Midoriya's expression in the comics is quite interesting, but when seeing this, few readers can laugh, whether it is this kind of magical development or Izuku Midoriya's expression. It was originally a very funny part, but the readers who have gradually been brought into the comics, seeing this ups and downs, can't laugh at all, but feel a kind of heart-wrenching depression. Originally, before the age of 4, a child will have a combination of the quirks of either the father or the mother. In the study of quirks, the doctor explained to Izuku Midoriya and his mother about the genetic issues of quirks. Child Izuku, who does not have any quirks, is a very rare type in this generation. Currently, 80% of the world's human beings have quirks, but Izuku Midoriya is a very rare quirks without existence. If we follow the development model in many comics and novels, as a male protagonist, he must naturally have something different, and Izuku Midoriya is naturally the same. He has a very rare quirks without, which is also very different in a sense, right? Without quirks, there is naturally no superpower that accompanies quirks, and for such a person, it is basically impossible to become a hero. Because the male protagonist Izuku Midoriya is a rare quirks without type, the doctor will let Izuku Midoriya give up the possibility of awakening quirks. And this also means that Izuku Midoriya will give up the dream of becoming a hero. In the comics, after checking his body and finding out that he cannot awaken his quirk, Izuku Midoriya once again watched the video recording the hero Auramander. However, this time, Izuku Midoriya did not scream like before, but kept crying. Although the plot development is somewhat unexpected, many readers are still observing it seriously. In addition to being curious about the development of the comic plot, more importantly, maybe it is because of the persistence of the male protagonist Midoriya Izuku. Midoriya Izuku did not give up on himself because of his no personality, nor did he give up his ideal of becoming a hero because of this, but he has been working hard silently. When being ridiculed by his classmates for having no quirk, Izuku Midoriya felt inferior and angry, but he did not give up. When being ridiculed by his classmates for applying for the Hero High School, Izuku Midoriya did not despair, but said to his classmates, "How can you know if you don't try?" When being maliciously persuaded by his classmates with words such as "it's better to give up such naive and childish ideas as soon as possible," Izuku Midoriya did not give up his persistence, but took notes seriously and worked hard to become a hero in the future. If you really want to be a hero, then I have a very efficient method. I believe you can awaken a good quirk in your next life, then climb onto the roof and do a doggy-style jump. Being humiliated by the classmate with the most potential to become a hero, Izuku Midoriya's anger instantly reached the maximum value, but after seeing the other party release the explosive ability casually, Izuku Midoriya immediately regained his sanity. Is such a weak guy really the protagonist of this comic? As a male protagonist, he is so weak. In a sense, he is really different. Many readers have such feelings when they see this. In particular, many readers have read the new series of One Punch Man before observing this comic. Compared with a certain bald man who is so strong that he can blow up the enemy with one punch, the performance of the male protagonist Izuku Midoriya in this My Hero Academia is really weak. However, the plot of the comic does not end here, or will Izuku Midoriya in the comic continue to be unlucky? Walking on the way home, Izuku Midoriya can only complain about what happened in school when he is alone. After all, as a rare existence with no personality, this is the most he can do, right? A ball of mud suddenly sprang out of the sewer, wrapped around Izuku Midoriya, trying to devour Izuku Midoriya's body. Despite his best efforts to resist, Izuku Midoriya, who has no quirk, is still entangled tightly, gradually unable to breathe, and his body loses strength. As the protagonist, Izuku Midoriya encountered a crisis of certain death near the end of the first chapter of the manga. Of course, the premise is that no one comes to save him. Boy, it's okay now. Because before Izuku Midoriya lost consciousness, he heard the lines that were familiar to the depths of his soul. "I'm here." A burly figure emerged from the sewer, clenched his right fist, and punched the mud that was wrapped around Izuku Midoriya. The fist did not directly hit the mud and Izuku Midoriya, but the strong wind pressure generated by the fist blew the mud away from Izuku Midoriya, Not only saving Izuku from the crisis, but also subduing the mud. Although he was on the verge of losing consciousness, Izuku Midoriya still recognized the person who saved him before he fell into a coma, just by relying on his signature move called Detroit Smash and the familiar lines. It was the number one hero that Izuku Midoriya had always admired and worshipped, Ormond. And then, just when most readers were curious about what would happen next, the serialization of the first episode of the comic My Hero Academia also happened to end here. Hey, Nyaizuma-kun, have you ever considered the feelings of the readers of the comics when you stuck the plot at this point? Yujiro finally couldn't help asking after seeing Nyaizuma AG put down the sample issue. No, he should have made suggestions as the editor-in-chief. If possible, it's better not to keep people on suspense about the content of the second episode. Yujiro-san, I've already finished the content of the second episode, do you want to see it? Nyaizuma AG took out the completed comic manuscript from the drawer and said to Yujiro with a smile. Yujiro swallowed hard, but his eyes were fixed on the comic manuscript in Nyaizuma AG's hand. It can be seen that Yujiro is quite entangled at the moment. But it's not time to submit the comics yet, so Yujiro-san. Nizuma AG seemed to suddenly remember something, ignoring Yujiro's eager look, and stuffed the comics back into the drawer. The second chapter of the comics, I'll tell you when you come to collect the comics. Nizuma AG has special abilities comparable to intuition and predicting the future in comics, so he wants to use the reader's side as an excuse to conceal his thoughts about wanting to read comics. Yujiro, should I say you deserve it? Perhaps according to Yoshida's usual saying, you deserve it? Is it an honor or misfortune to be named by the boss to work overtime continuously? Although it's a little late, I wish all readers a happy new year.